Hey y'all, it's Heel Heat time.
Hi everybody and welcome to Heel Heat. My name is George Coles and this is an episode of It Came From The Network. Now on It Came From The Network we review the weird, the wild, the campy, and sometimes just downright bad things that you can find on the WWE Network. On this episode we're reviewing WCW Road Wild 1998. Now, before we go into reviewing the show itself, I like the fact that back in the day, WCW would do things like this, would go out to Sturgis for these bike rallies, would do their Daytona Monday Night Raw shows, would do Bash at the Beach on the beach, and try different things and put wrestling in front of different crowds, in front of different, I don't know, just give it different aesthetics, made it feel different, made it something special, I guess. Probably some of them worked well. The Monday Nitros coming from Club La Vila in Panama City were always good. The shows they had on the beach were good. I think the Road Wild and the predecessor Hog Wild had some mixed reactions. Basically, it's a free show at the Sturgis Motorcycle Rally, if you're not familiar with the concept. And if you're not familiar with the Sturgis Motorcycle Rally, it's basically every year Sturgis, South Dakota hosts the biggest motorcycle rally event. People come from all over the country, all over the world, drive their motorcycles into Sturgis, hang out, share stories, share beers, go to different shows and exhibits and everything motorcycle. That being said, let's jump right into the show. First match of the night, we have Barbarian versus Meng, the Faces of Fear facing off against each other. This is a match that, on paper and in my head, and not really remembering this pay-per-view so well, I thought, okay, we're going to start off good. We're going to have a nice little brawl, a nice, intense match with two of the more intense wrestlers of the time, two real legit badass tough guys. It ended up being a plodding, boring, I don't know how to say it, kind of looked like neither of the two guys wanted to be there. They were kind of half-heartedly throwing punches at each other. Nothing was stiff, nothing was violent looking. I mean, for two guys that are two of the toughest wrestlers in the history of the business, and questionably Meng, aka Haku, might be the toughest guy in the history of the business. I expected more of a brawl, more of a fight. It just didn't come off as a good match. Meng picks up the win. Afterwards, we see Barbarian's stablemate, Hugh Morris, come down. They double team Meng, which brings out Hacksaw Jim Duggan to make the save. Just a weird way to start off the show. Probably a precursor of what would happen. Next up, we have the Public Enemy versus the Boogie Knights, which was Disco Inferno and Alex Wright, with Tokyo Magnum as their second or manager or whatever he was, trying to be part of their group. This started off as a regular tag match. Somehow, mysteriously in the middle of the match, it turns into a street fight, which is somehow just okay. I'll say this about the Public Enemy. If you've watched my shows and you've seen me and you've seen my opinion, you know I have a very fond spot in my heart for the original ECW and the guys that came from there. Public Enemy is not an exception. I have a fond spot in my heart for Public Enemy. However, you take Public Enemy out of ECW and their act just doesn't work. They didn't work in WCW. They didn't work in WWF. Or, yeah, at the time it was WWF. I don't know why. I can't tell you why. I can't tell you what Paul Heyman did with them in ECW that Eric Bischoff or Vince McMahon couldn't do. All I can tell you is watching a match like this shows you why. They relied a little bit too much on the hardcore stuff, not enough on the wrestling side. And the hardcore spots they did came over too contrived, too set up, too much went into them. That being said, Public Enemy picked up the win. Starting off pretty bad, 2 matches that were underwhelming in a row. My hopes got up for the third match, a 3-way Ravens rules match, because at this time every match that Raven was in was under Ravens rules. We had Raven versus Perry Saturn versus Canyon. This was after Saturn had left the flock and before Raven and Canyon had fully formed an alliance. They were kind of working their way towards it at this point. Another back-to-back hardcore matches. This one was a little bit better. I wouldn't say it was a great match. It wasn't a terrible match. This was something, it would have felt more in place if it was leading off the top of the second hour on a Thunder, or if it was leading off the third hour in Nitro. It was a good match coming up after 2 stinkers, which kind of gave it a little bit of put a little bit of smell on it itself. Probably one of the better matches of the night. I wouldn't say it's any of the 3 men's best matches, or even on the top of even in their top 10 or 20 lists. Saturn picks up the win, kind of expectantly, as being the newly formed face at the time. But like I said, decent match, probably a Monday Nitro quality match. Definitely not something I want to pay $50 to watch. Next up, we have Psychosis versus Rey Mysterio Jr. at the time. This was Rey Mysterio at his best. This was a good match again. These 2 guys had better matches. Halloween Havoc, I believe 98, the same year, they had a great match. I believe that was when I might be wrong on that. The few matches they had in ECW, there was a couple times they faced each other on Monday Nitro. These 2 guys matched up well. This isn't their best match, but by far it's probably the best match on this card. Or if not, it's one of the 2 best matches on the card. Mysterio here shows exactly why he got the fan base he had. He was as innovative, as creative as he's ever been. We kind of get a little bit... We forget now, after years of Mysterio having knee injuries and being a little bit more limited in what he could do in the ring and relying on somewhat of a set move set, how innovative and how much of a game changer he really was. This is him in his prime, him picking up the win over Psychosis, one of his great nemesises. A good match. Like I said, probably one of the 2 best matches on the show. Just a fun, exciting match. It fell flat on the crowd, who, again, I don't think that a bunch of bikers and biker gangs, that their thing is going to be Mexican luchadors. I could be wrong. I would have figured that the 3 brawls that went before this would be more of the crowd's thing, which they seem to be more into than this, which may have hurt the perception of this match. It was a good match again, one of the 2 best of the night. Next up, we had arguably one of the worst matches of the night. Chavo Guerrero Jr. versus Stevie Ray. This match, it just didn't click. The 2 guys didn't work well together. Neither one of them seemed to ever really get going. It was a quick, short match. Stevie Ray picks up the win with the slapjack, which is his version of the pedigree. Afterwards, we see Eddie Guerrero coming to the ring to save his nephew Chavo, who Stevie Ray was going to beat with the slapjack, the weapon, not to be confused with the move. At the time, Eddie and Chavo were somewhat feuding, so there was a little bit of a weird kind of standoffish vibe with the 2. But just a match that didn't seem to come off well. Again, like I said with Barbarian and Meng, two guys that really didn't seem like they wanted to be there. Maybe their thing, and I can understand. Maybe they're not into motorcycles. Maybe they don't want to drive to South Dakota to be in a motorcycle rally. It makes sense. It's not everybody's bag. It may not be fun for them. That being said, the motorcycle crowd may not enjoy what they like. It's not a knock on the motorcycle crowd. Don't get me wrong. I'm not trying to do that. I'm just saying certain people enjoyed and thrived being out there. Guys like Hulk Hogan like being in front of this kind of a crowd. You know, guys like Eric Bischoff like being in front of this crowd. The Wolfpack, Goldberg, guys that fit in more with that kind of thing that drove motorcycles around. Worked well. Next up, we're advertising a match with Rick Steiner versus Scott Steiner. However, Buff Bagwell comes out with Scott Steiner on a hospital bed, saying that Scott Steiner's too injured to wrestle. They have a doctor's note, which brings out J.J. Dillon, who was their quasi-general manager, matchmaker, whatever he was at the time. I forget what his official terminology was, but the authority figure on the show. And J.J. Dillon says, okay, you don't have to wrestle this match, but Scott Steiner, if you don't wrestle on our next pay-per-view, then you're going to get fired. So, this is a match that I think would have went over well in front of this crowd. Scott and Rick Steiner, two hard-hitting guys in front of a crowd full of bikers and been drinking all day, would have went over well in my opinion. WCW, for whatever reason, decided to move along an angle instead of giving us a match. Now, next up, we see Bryan Adams versus Mongo McMichael. You heard me mention matches that are bad on this card. This was the worst. At this time, Mongo's already been in wrestling for a few years. He should have picked up more than he did. This really seemed like Bryan Adams, who's a solid worker, solid wrestler. He's not your carry a guy to a great match wrestler, but a good working wrestler. This seemed like Mongo McMichael's first match in professional wrestling, not knowing what anything is to do. It went with a slow, lumbering pace. It never really got off the ground. Mongo picks up the win over Adams. Just another match in a long line of matches that didn't exactly hit, didn't exactly do what I would like it to do. And this isn't me looking at it with rose-colored glasses going, you know. This is me looking at it objectively going, this was a bad match. There were missed spots, there were blown spots. It really honestly looked like Mongo McMichael forgot everything he learned up to that point. And all during the match, we have Vincent, who was formerly known as Virgil, trying to interfere on Bryan Adams' behalf, which cost him the match at the end. The less I say about it, the better off I am, probably. Now, you heard me mention earlier with Psychosis and Mysterio that was one of the two better matches of the show. Here's the other one. Juventud Guerrero versus Y2J Chris Jericho, who at the time was just Chris Jericho, with Dean Malenko as a referee. At the time, Malenko and Jericho kind of had a feud going on, and Jericho kind of had a feud with Hoovy and the whole rest of the Cruiserweight division. This was a good match. This was very solid. You have two good wrestlers, probably Juventud Guerrero at the apex of his talent. Chris Jericho was up and coming and flying up and growing by leaps and bounds in WCW. Every month, every pay-per-view, every show, he got better and better until he became one of the best wrestlers in the world. this was a great show, great match, great fun, great interaction between all three. Hoovy picks up the win. Just a fun match in the midst of a bunch of other bad matches. Now next up we have a battle royal pitting members of the NWO Black and White versus members of the NWO Wolfpack versus Bill Goldberg. Now that's how they made it seem, not just that it's a battle royal, it's the Black and the White versus the Wolfpack versus Goldberg. And if you're not familiar, at some point in '98, the NWO split into two factions. The NWO Black and White Hollywood, which went with Hulk Hogan, and then the NWO Wolfpack, which was more of a face group that went with Kevin Nash. Now in this match we have, on the Wolfpack side, we had Sting, Luger, Conan, and Kevin Nash. And I believe, I want to say Macho Man was in there, but don't quote me on this. I watched this a few days ago, so I don't honestly remember if he was or not. On the Black and White side, we had the Giant, we had Kurt Hennig, Scott Hall, just, you know, your regular NWO Black and White guys. Then you had Goldberg. Basically, the match was the two NWO factions fighting, with Goldberg eliminating them both. Goldberg picking up the win. Continuing, this was during the Goldberg undefeated streak, and Goldberg was the world champion. Instead of having him defend his belt on the match, they put him in a battle royal, which had no real stipulation, no the winner gets a title shot, nothing of that matter. He was just in a battle royal for no apparent reason other than Goldberg needed something to do. Could have easily had him wrestle any of the other guys in the battle royal, or someone else altogether, but WCW booking at the time, let's make Goldberg look strong, make it seem like he's beat both NWO factions all by himself. Now we get to the main event of the night. Probably one of the most heavily hyped professional wrestling matches of all time. Hulk Hogan and Eric Bischoff versus Diamond Dallas Page and Jay Leno. Now, for some of you younger folks that don't really recall Jay Leno in his prime, may have some memories of him. At this time, Jay Leno was the hottest act on television. His Tonight Show was just drawing monster ratings, and the WCW was drawing monster ratings. Hogan and Bischoff had went on there, they did a whole angle, and this was coming off when DDP and Karl Malone teamed up against Hogan and Dennis Rodman. They were trying to do everything they can to cross over into the mainstream, and there was no more mainstream guy than Jay Leno at this point. The guy was putting up monster numbers, just killing it. And he, legitimately, Jay Leno was never my cup of tea. I always liked David Letterman better, that's personal preference. However, the guy's funny. The guy's hilarious, he's a good interviewer. He did great with the Tonight Show. But he wasn't a wrestler, or even an athlete. See, the difference between this one and the match with Rodman and Malone in it is Dennis Rodman and Karl Malone are world-class athletes. Guys that have played in the NBA. Guys that are athletically gifted. Probably two of the biggest, most athletically gifted guys in the world at the time. This we had Eric Bischoff, who was okay in the ring, but definitely not a professional wrestler. The match itself was garbage. The spectacle was, yeah, they got what they wanted. It was all over SportsCenter. It was on the Tonight Show hyped. It was on the Entertainment Tonights of the time. The local news talked about it. However, it wasn't a good match. It was lumbering. Jay Leno looked like if I got into a wrestling ring, and he didn't look like he belonged. He didn't look like he could hurt even Eric Bischoff. He looked like an old man wrestling in jogging pants and a t-shirt. The faces pick up the win when Kevin Eubanks, Jay Leno's band guy, band director, I don't know what they call him, band leader, whatever it is, gets in the ring and gives a diamond cutter to Bischoff. Leno pins him. Good guys pick up the win. Afterwards, we see Bill Goldberg come out to help him stave off the NWO. Sorry, folks, been fighting a cold here recently, and it's coming up a little bit here. But anyway, we go off the air with DDP, Jay Leno, and Bill Goldberg celebrating. Gives you a nice little good warm feeling, a good clip to play on the Tonight Show, a good clip to play on SportsCenter, on Access Hollywood, on Entertainment Tonight, on the Tonight Show, all that fun stuff. But not a good wrestling match. And that's the whole thing of this card. We had, I'll count them right now, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9 wrestling matches. A 10th that was an announced match that didn't happen. 2 matches out of the 9 were good. So basically you're batting 20%, which anybody that watches baseball will tell you batting 200 will get you kicked out of the majors. So it's basically what they did here. They batted 200. They went 2 for 10. A bad show at a particularly good time for WCW. A lot of stuff that they did in '98 really worked. This was something that, in my opinion, really didn't work. But now, we're going to jump into the ratings. Now, we have a 1 to 5 scale, 1 being the worst, 5 being the best. 1 is a Gobbledygooker, 2 is a Renegade, 3 is a Hurricane Helms, 4 is a Goldust, 5 is a Kane. I'm going with a 1. This is a Gobbledygooker. Probably, in this era of WCW, the worst wrestling match, or in the Bischoff era, in the NWO era, when the NWO was hot, probably the worst pay-per-view of that time frame. Now, there were some other bad ones when we get to the 2000, 2001s, when Bischoff comes back and when we have Russo in there. This, at a time when they were extremely hot, an extremely hyped show, ended up being a dud. And it just hit the floor. To me, it was just a really bad show. I didn't enjoy it. I didn't have fun rewatching it. The setting was okay. It was interesting. It was fun. It wasn't conducive to what they tried to put out there. The matches were mostly boring and lethargic or nonsensical. But it is what it is. Unfortunately, every great company has bad times, and this was one of WCW's bad times. But basically, that's all I have to say about that. My name is George Coles, and this has been another episode of It Came From the Network.